Welcome back, Austin Startup Week audience, and I hope you enjoyed that networking break. I'm very excited for our next talk. I've worked with probably at least 100 startups here at Capital Factory that are looking to break into the DoDX contracting space. The majority of these companies are working on software tools, SaaS products, things that could be developed on or integrated into a DevSecOps platform or an API layer. A target customer for most of these companies is something like Platform One. Oh, by the way, that's right. Cody Paul's here today. He commented about my t-shirt earlier. It's not the P1 logo. This is the new Capital Factory. I think this is like an Austin Startup Week VIP commemorative shirt, but it's got a tribute to Jedi on the back. But anyway, so Platform One would be a key customer for these guys. And if they're not working on that, they're working on a technology that either directly accomplishes or enables an AI approach or an AI-enabled capability, technologies that are going to leverage cloud to edge, and all of those things. And so when I heard the Army launch the Enterprise Cloud Management Office, my first instinct was why? Like, doesn't the DoD already have Platform One? And we got some good insight on kind of how that works from Kurt just a minute ago. But then ECMO hires a good friend of mine and a very self-starting innovator named Spencer McDonald. And I thought, okay, well, they've clearly got somebody up there who's finding good people and getting them in. And that's why I'm just super happy to intro this next session and speaker. So next up is our keynote address by Paul Puckett. Paul's the director of the Army's Enterprise Cloud Management Office. So in this session, you're going to learn what's new with ECMO, which is the Army's cloud and DevSecOps infrastructure that's going to power, I believe, the new software factory. And I'm happy to introduce Paul Puckett. So Paul took the reins at ECMO in November of last year. And prior to joining ECMO, Paul was the CTO of Pivotal Software. And prior to that, he was building national security software out in industry, and he was integrating them on the government side within the intelligence community. So Paul, you have spent literally your entire career, it seems like, in the cloud. And I don't know the data specifically on this, but you also might be the youngest SES in the Department of Defense. If not, you're definitely one of. So welcome. I've gotten to know you a little bit through my good friend Spencer, who's a very junior officer, a lieutenant, made himself known as an innovator and a disruptor, and then ended up on your team. And I certainly hope that, as we go through this, we'll talk about, or you'll talk about, your approach to finding the right talent without regards to, what their career pathway has been or their rank or their seniority. Paul, welcome to the Capital Factory stage.
Sweet. Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's awesome to be here. So your intro is actually really interesting to me because it kind of teases out really the existence of the ECMO, but also a journey that I've been on for probably the last 5-6 years, which is really understanding all the details and all the nuances when it comes to quote unquote cloud and the DoD and what that actually means, because there's a lot of government policy and kind of I would say guidance, but it becomes kind of like thou shalt do kind of things when it comes to the cloud, is really understanding not just how we buy cloud, right now, how we just get access to compute and storage, but all of the foundational elements that essentially an enterprise within the DoD has to put in place in order to securely access and manage and use commercial cloud services, let alone how we understand how to bring that value to the tactical edge, right? To the outside of the continental United States. Like there's all of these kind of like hoops and kind of hurdles that you've got to go through. And so it's a really intriguing conversation. You're like, hey, I thought like Platform One was like the answer for everything. And really what we've got to understand is there's an entire ecosystem of standalone enterprise environments that have been created within every single agency, every single MILDEP in the DoD, because everyone has their own authority to operate their own systems and data within their own enterprise. And essentially, we've got a massive kind of litany of legacy enterprise services that have typically been acquired and built in a stovepipe fashion. And that's because we're not too terribly good at predicting the future. So we've always had a really fixed architecture, fixed requirements. And we are now in those transitional phases of understanding just precisely what data and what services we have, how we start to connect all of this information in real time, meanwhile learning how to leverage cloud services at enterprise scale. And so the reason why the Army stood up and created the ECMO is because doing this for the third largest enterprise in the world is really challenging, especially when you've got 1.4 million people globally distributed. You've got a mission that spans every single classification and network enclave. And so how you start to connect all of those pieces together, how you start to leverage cloud, how you start to navigate all the crazy hooks that comes with cloud and the DoD governance and policy is a challenge. And until the ECMO existed, there was really no one to help drive and navigate that challenge in the Army. And so prior to my time being with Pivotal, I was actually a civilian within the intelligence community. So I was part of the team that was fortunate enough to play a role in the stand-up of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's unclassified cloud, and also spearheading the DevSecOps ecosystem and building low to high. I was actually part of the team with the original ATO in a day. And that foundation of ATO in a day is actually the first accrediting body and hosting of what is now kind of the famous tanker planner tool of Kessel Run. And so the framework of the continuous ATO is actually built off of what we modeled back at NGA. So I've navigated similar journeys before, but I've never been on a journey with 1.4 million people along for the ride with me. And it is just absolutely awesome to be a part of. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of go through, I have an aversion to slides, but typically some type of visual helps people understand, kind of what's going on, and essentially just trying to help people see what we're doing, see what we're all about, so we can codify what's happening. And so if you guys can see some slides that I've got sharing right now, I just want to click on through. So a lot of people ask the question, what is the ECMO? Well, if you read the Army modernization strategy, the Secretary makes it really clear, is that the foundational component when it comes to our ability to rapidly learn and to deliver new capability, we need cloud resources available at the click of a button. And so how within the Army we can leverage cloud computing most effectively, as well as the design principles that comes with cloud native design and modern software development, just kind of writ large. We need someone who is responsible for driving that strategy and essentially leading the way within the Army for how we capitalize on the value of cloud. And so we've codified this in our vision for the ECMO, as well as our mission. And you can read kind of the longer words to yourself. What you're going to see is we believe that it's absolutely critical for the Army to have digital overmatch over our near-peer adversaries. And I'll dive into a little bit of detail of precisely what that means. But it's really getting after, we need our people to have raised acumen when it comes to technology and when it comes to cloud and when it comes to software. We need to be absolute experts in how we can yield this as a strategic asset. What goes with that then is how we understand our data, how we understand software, how it's built, virtual infrastructure, how we leverage that as a strategic asset, and then ways that our business processes that have been formed around the PC era and the limitations of the PC era, how do we change those business processes to become more real-time enablers of experimentation and then operations? And then finally, we believe that there's an imperative for us to have a global ecosystem in which computing resources are abundant and available at any point in time, given the dynamic nature of war and how we fight. And this has to be a secure global platform. So my office is responsible for being a champion and a catalyst for that digital acumen, is being really the deliverer and the driver of how we change the way that we build and field systems and our processes around it. And then finally, actually providing those secure services for how we maintain an enterprise within a cloud ecosystem and a global nature. And so I just show you a little bit of the divisions within the ECMO, just so you understand how we make sense of ourselves and our roles and responsibilities. High performing teams really understand the roles and responsibilities, where they interface and how they collaborate. And so we're structured simply around, kind of the expected financial account management side of the house, but it spans also to the services we deliver in cloud, how we manage data and software, how we understand the foundational changes of security automation, as well as how we enable people around solutions architecture and what it means to start to redesign these systems to actually become more cloud native. And we've codified this in a cloud plan, and really this is kind of a strategy as well as a plan, because it understands the imperative, it understands kind of the opportunities that exist in cloud. Really, we've got a number of strategic objectives that we then tie to key milestones, as well as KPIs and OKRs for how we're going to actually achieve this. We try and codify in a way that we're really on this mission to change the way that we design, field, and deliver secure, functioning, valuable, usable capabilities to our warfighter globally. And so it's getting after the fact we have to be adaptable in this dynamic world. We have to build applications and services that are resilient within this dynamic world. And sometimes the failures that happen, we need core competencies for how we do this effectively. And we essentially, there are a number of things that need to change, from how we decrease the time to field, as well as improve our security accreditation processes. But this, along with a number of other objectives, are captured within the cloud plan. I can make sure that everyone's got a link to that. It helps you understand a little bit of the way that we see the world, and the imperative and the why of kind of the purpose, and then also the why in movement, because you have to understand, where we are today and why we have to do something about it. So for everyone that likes network diagrams, C-Army is essentially the DoD required, governance and policy for a secure cloud ecosystem, is what we refer to as C-Army. It's an enterprise capability. And this is different than compute and storage buy that you get from like a Jedi. Those are all the building blocks, if you will. But how do you ensure that they've been built securely so that we can actually accredit and run operational DoD systems within the cloud? We're providing that as an enterprise service. And this is a bit of a shift for the Army. Typically 1.4 million people, we're huge. Delivering an enterprise centralized service for the Army is almost unheard of in some instances. But with the connective nature of cloud computing and how we can ensure that people and systems can have access to real-time information, it allows us to leverage technology and automation to deliver a great customer experience in a secure, centralized way that actually meets the needs of our operational architecture, and also serves as kind of that medium for the transformational nature from our stovepipe systems across our data centers today, and how we start to connect and unlock the value of our data. And really, if you dive into the details, the Army put out a data and cloud execution order, and this is really the journey that we're on. And I'd love for the startup community to help us on this journey, but I'm trying to help you understand kind of the way a lot of systems come to be in the DoD, because we have to understand how it came to be in order to do something about it. And typically in the past, we'll require major programs of record. And it's tough when you've got a fixed architecture in data centers. You've got to be a little bit more specific of what you think that future world is going to be, because you've got long lead times for acquiring hardware. You've got long lead times for configuration, for testing, because you've got to make sure that it's right. Because if you find that halfway down the road you need to change, you've got to start all of that acquisition over. And so understanding that fixed nature of the data centers is really why we get these monoliths. And so what we're on this journey and helping the Army understand is really these kind of monolithic systems are really just kind of a system of systems. There's services, there's data, there's used, in kind of special ways, but then there's some more common ways that we're actually building these systems. And a lot of time, there's a duplicative nature of what's going on within these systems. And so if we kind of look at how we're built today, really tightly coupled capabilities, it's kind of tough to distinguish what data and what services we actually have. Is we are on this journey and seeing ourselves, and this was tasked in November of this last year across the entire Army, to see ourselves. What applications do we have? What data sets do we have? How are we storing those data sets? How are we exchanging that data? What are all of the customized point-to-point interfaces for what we thought were important for the sharing of information? And where do we actually see more value for how we unlock the value of this data? And so we're in the midst of seeing ourselves in a different way. And this is across every single command. We've kind of bucketed ourselves across mission areas, whether that's defense intelligence, war fighting, the business, or the enterprise. And we're on this journey to start to decouple ourselves from these tight monoliths. And so what we're trying to see is the various services in the data. Hey, maybe there's duplication of data. How are we using it perhaps differently? How are we storing it perhaps in the exact same way? Can we see ways that we can optimize the efficiencies of the IT systems, as well as see where there's actual value for us to unlock the data in a way that perhaps we haven't been using it? And it's this move from just kind of, what we thought the future needed to look like to true now experimentation, because we know we're not that great at predicting the future. And so how we need to exist is really becoming this open architecture. And we see this as foundational when it comes to how we interconnect and share data in real time. And so this journey to unlock the value of our data to gain IT efficiency is really foundational in the Army modernization strategy, as well as the cloud plan. And it also then seeks into, okay, well, if that's what we now think we understand about ourselves, how do we make sure that we're not acquiring new solutions that kind of fall into the old pattern? what are kind of the basic tools of the trade when it comes to delivering new capability and experimentation. And I can try and explain this a number of different ways to people, but if you want to be an Olympic lifter or a bodybuilder, or you want to be a track star, at some point in time, you're probably going to pick up a barbell and start working on some muscles that are common across all of them. So there's some common tools and trades and processes that are shared along this journey of modern software development, data analytics. And again, to do it in the DoD, it requires an operational running ecosystem that is integrated with the independent business processes and security processes that we see shared across the DoD. And so our complement to the DevSecOps ecosystem across all of DoD is Create. And this is an integrated with Army businesses, but interoperable across any DevSecOps ecosystem environment that's going to allow us to train soldiers and civilians on how to build better product, how to experiment with new solutions, how to get rapid feedback from soldiers in the field and deliver better capability based on that feedback. And it was really shifting us from this predict the future mentality to a how do I quickly test a hypothesis securely and safely that meets DoD specifications requirements, integrates with Army business processes, and allows me to do so quickly when and where it's needed. And so as you alluded to, Kevin, this is the foundational component enabling the AFC software factory. And so of soldiers and civilians for building better product, partnering with commands across the Army and what problems to solve, partnering with industry and academia within Austin, really driving that kind of crew, if you will, that partnership that's needed for us to tap into new wonderful technologies, tap into the contextual experience of the Army, and bring that together, break down some barriers, and deliver awesome capabilities to our soldiers. And so, again, I don't like to spend a whole bunch of time. I'm actually super jazzed for the conversation, some of the stuff that we can tease out, Kevin. But I just kind of put some thoughts together of how can you help? Can you imagine this journey that you're on? That we're shifting from a program mindset to a product mindset. It's fundamentally different skills. It's different thoughts. It's different approaches when it comes to solving a problem. There are different things that people are measured against now when it comes to how we incentivize the right behaviors. Is that we're moving from how well can you plan and cost schedule and performance for how well can you achieve an objective. It's fundamentally new muscle for us. And so how we partner with industry and understanding and also seeing what right looks like is really critical there. We're also shifting this world from requirements to hypotheses, moving towards the scientific method for testing and validating what is actually a good idea or not, and is trying to get to this world where typically we think of all of the thou shalt requirements and we hold a program hostage to probably the most unimportant thou shalt statement, where how can we get to the greatest value as quickly as possible and securely to our soldiers, and then maybe find that 20% of what we thought was important actually isn't important. That quick learning is really critical for us. So again, if we move from requirements to hypotheses, what are we going to measure along the way to make sure that we're actually on the right path? These are all things that we need industry and academia to help us with because it's new muscles for us. You can see some of the rest, but one of the ones I want to highlight is for us at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most is our data. There's so much operational data that we just drop on the cutting room floor because a thou shalt statement in the past may not have thought it was important. And now we find with some of the decisions that we need to make, that context is absolutely critical. And this is why the cloud is called out as the key enabler of the Army modernization strategy, because we see it as now the on-demand available resources for us to experiment and learn with our data that allows us to drive towards learning with machine learning and tapping into artificial intelligence to help us make decisions against criteria that we never even thought that we had to be looking at before. Where is there new opportunity for us that perhaps we can look to a machine to help us make those decisions where otherwise, we would kind of fall in our old ways of how we've done business. And so that journey is the journey that we're on. And we're really at the beginning of seeing ourselves in a number of places. But across the last year, we've seen actually immense movement in some of our key priorities. And so how we dive into our sensor to shooter kill chain, there's critical components there for how we're learning, already seeing ourselves in optimizing data sets. We want that value to scale across the Army. And so part of my challenge within the ECMO is delivering an ecosystem that enables for that scale, and then also the people that understand how we're going to navigate ourselves on that journey, partnering with the right people that can help us as new technology emerges and how we can bring that in quickly to deliver greater value to our warfighters. So I've covered a lot. There's probably a lot that you want to unpack there, but I hope that kind of sets the stage, if you will, for some of the conversations, some of the challenges that we have our way, and hopefully drives a good collaboration here as we move forward.
Yeah, you did cover a lot. And I'm trying to think about, how to unpack this and where to start. And it seems like this conversation would probably be best had, drinking a cold one on the leather couch I'm envisioning underneath that big exposed brick wall behind you. But let's start with, so I'm going to start with a concept that should be a program someday of JADC2. I don't think it's actually a program yet. I think it's a concept, but it's this idea that across the joint environment, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, anybody, and across any system, an aerial system, a space system, a subsurface system, a system that exists only in the logical space, that you can take any piece of data and translate that into an action or an insight that translates to an action that then goes back and affects something on the battlefield using any system, right? Whether it's a digital effect, whether it's a psychological effect, whether it's a kinetic effect, whether it's a hypersonic effect. So like that's the goal, right? And then I see that, you have, and as I understand it, and you can correct me because you probably know better, the Joint AI Center and the Joint Common Foundation is supposed to be sort of the rules that everybody's building their systems on. That will enable that to be possible, right? However, the rules don't exist because the JCF contract was just awarded and the JAIC is still young, not quite as young as your organization. But all of these other platforms and systems are becoming ingrained, and they will become bureaucratic because this is the government. So how do you deal with that? Tell me just your perspective on all these different kind of programs, and ultimately they're supposed to be feeding again this joint commonality of communications, analysis, processing, whatever you want to call it, and then action.
Yeah, listen, let's peel it all the way back. Before you can have a joint common foundation within the JAIC, right, for running data analytics and kind of gleaning better information, building algorithms, you have to have data. You have to have data. Bad data, good. At the very least, you've got to have data. And where's that data going to come from? It's going to come from our operational systems that we have today. Have our operational systems that we have today been designed? Was there a thou shalt statement 10 years ago that said, thou shalt also be able to, in real time, share data with the JCF in order for us to learn machine learning and artificial intelligence? You and I both know the answer is no. So our systems have not been designed in any way to deliver that real-time data where the JCF can now learn these things and apply ML and AI, which means that we have to optimize these systems so that either they can share data in real time, or at the very least, we can tap into that data, right, with some lag, make some sense of it, condition it in some way, have some parity for how we're going to understand and join this data together to enable the JAIC and the JCF to deliver their value. And then with what they learn, have our systems also had a thou shalt statement that says new algorithms, new applications, new capabilities. You've got to be able to be fielded right next to that operational capability to see the effects and the opportunity. And the answer is also no, right? So we didn't have this opportunity to predict the future, which means that we now have the work in front of us to optimize. We've got to decompose these systems, create what services for what data sets need to be available in real time, where we can afford some lag, and ensure that now our network connectivity facilitates ourselves in a way where we can share data in real time with the JCF and the JAIC. Like, this is the journey that everyone's on right now. And I don't think a lot of people understand that kind of step one. Like, where's the data coming from, right? Especially in a world where we fight operationally disconnected, typically in a tactical ecosystem where real-time access to data being exfilled at the rate and the speed that we need to learn quickly is something that's like, that's almost unheard of with some of the limited network connectivity that we have. So how do we, one, optimize those network connectivities, but then two, how do we also prioritize the data sets that need access to that network? Or even three, how do we get the right amount of processing for how we can learn and apply analytics of data at the edge? Like, these are all really complex questions, but the system that we have today isn't going to get us there, right? What got us here is not going to get us there. And so there's this collaborative work that we have to work together in understanding what data we have, where it's stored, how we unlock its potential, and how we share it across the DoD, because we are a joint community, right? We do not fight alone in any way, shape, or form. And if you look in the details of JADC2, it's really talking about any sensor, any shooter, any C2 node is right. My ability to see all data available at any point in time, to be able to contextualize the information, to be able to make a good decision of the right sensor, the right shooter, and the right data set that I need to act upon in order to achieve my now joint mission. Does that help you understand? There's this whole entire world that we have to unlock and unpack in a way that actually enables the JAIC and the JCF to bring that value to bear.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I mean, you're effectively building, the reservoir. I won't call it a lake. I'll call it a reservoir because it's empty at the moment, right? Do you have enough water to fill it though?
We've got, listen, people don't understand. First off, we've got a number of data lakes and data warehouses that exist and inside the Army today. Our defense and cyber operations missions with Gabriel Nimbus, a massive big data platform that exists there. One of the largest when it comes to logistics, as well as supply chain and financial, that was also critical for how the Army responded to the COVID crisis in what we have with C-Probe and a number of the initiatives with the Office of Business Transformation and G8. We see that expanding into GFIM with G357 as well. So we've got tons of water, but we also have so much water that we just pour out on the floor simply because there wasn't a thou shalt statement to capture in a way, or maybe people aren't like, hey, is this valuable right now? Well, I can't predict the future. Where are we actually storing that data so we can run long-term analytics against it? And so we're starting to pick up these data sets. We're not dropping them on the floor. How do we actually store this and analyze this? And that's precisely the capability with compute and storage in the cloud is, we don't have the time or the resources to acquire all the physical infrastructure to do that. Let's just spin up cloud resources. Let's start to chew on this data, make sense of this data, and then also start to service enable our data sets that exist across the Army so we can get closer to that real-time exchange of information.
So yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic effort. I have been of the belief for a couple of years since I started working with these companies and really kind of digging into how this technology is going to evolve. That there's so many things, the capabilities that are going to be possible with artificial intelligence, as an example, as the compute gets stronger, as the algorithms get, as the ability to optimize parameters using automated model generation and those kinds of things becomes a more mature technology, that's going to enable things like predictive maintenance. And we're doing predictive maintenance now, but we're not doing it to the extent that we could. And I'll just use that as one example. But as I understand it, the vast majority of data that would help us be able to train to do predictive analytics exists in the form of, either purely analog like paper or PDFs and those kinds of things. So that effort to turn that water into something useful, I think is super cool. So along that ends, I've believed that one of the DoD's core efforts should be to take companies that are doing this exact type of thing out in the commercial industry and then turn them on to prioritize the data locations and sources within the Army, and then just start awarding a bunch of little contracts. Kind of like I used to be a lawyer, and I've done some complex litigation, and you outsource your document review. And it's kind of the same thing. So that would be my opinion, but we've got a couple of questions in the chat about, how can this community always wants to know how they can help. Obviously they're entrepreneurs, so they want to get on contracts, right? Mm-hmm. They want to grow business or win business and grow the value of their companies. So the question from that is how can they help? What are the technology efforts that you guys over at ECMO see the entrepreneurial community being able to help you pull off, and how do you intend to engage with them?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. So when we talk about kind of building new muscles is when we're in the see ourselves journey of, how is data structured? How is it actually stored? What kind of information do I want to glean from this? Right now, it's a lot of new technical skill sets that we're in the midst of shifting and upskilling our workforce to actually be able to provide. So in the meantime, though, right, and even then to continue on that journey, We need the technical acumen from the community to come in and help us and understand precisely how that's done in ways that we can leverage technology to accelerate how we make sense of our data, exactly to your point. But a lot of times I would say it's almost like that aha moment of like who needs to be in the room and what technology would actually help me is starting to engage with people and starting to ask some of those questions that teases back like, hey, this is actually where your problem is. Because again, these are kind of new muscles for us in the Army to be like, hey, how's your data stored? How's it structured? Like, how are you making sense of your data? How are you conditioning your data before you actually make a decision against it? What's actually happening on the back end side is those kinds of questions, and that engagement with industry is really critical. And more commands are reaching out, more and more PEOs are reaching out saying, hey, help me understand this, throwing out some RFIs there. How would I make sense of this problem? And you're going to see that really increase as more and more people dive a little bit deeper in the data side of the house. But then I'd also suggest as you engage with someone, especially if you've got a new product or new capability, and I've said this before in other things, is don't so much immediately engage on like, here's my new product, because you may not land the point that it's even needed in the first place, right? That discovery moment with a customer, especially within the Army, helping us understand, get to that aha moment of like, oh, good gracious, I have a massive, right, data set problem that I can't make sense of at the speed and scale that I need. I've got to have a partner in this industry to help me do that. That's really, really, really critical. And then I would also say, especially for now, the doing side of the house, the software development side of the house, you're seeing a movement within the government towards open source like we've never seen before, where we're realizing there's always been this open source community upstream of new value coming to us that we have to tap into and make sense of. And so how you come to the table, coming with a way where there's now a standard, or you're striving to create a community to establish a standard, is really critical. Like when you see containers taking off, right? Not until the OCI like hit the streets does it actually start to make a little bit more sense. When we can start to standardize on the Open Container Initiative, here's how we should be structuring ourselves. That's super critical. And so it's more so just as much as you engage with us, help us to understand ourselves, but also engaging with each other, creating a community and a standard, is because, when we start to dive into something, you're going to see it like a natural aversion. We've been burnt in the past of these proprietary things. Nobody else does it. And we get super locked into a capability, and then we can't actually sustain the value at the other end because it becomes entirely too expensive. When we build those communities and those standards, it allows us to relax a little bit and focus on the value add rather than kind of this natural aversion to, it sounds like a lot of IP I might have to pay a lot for in the future. So those are just kind of my initial thoughts. It is definitely a beer conversation. But that's, those are just kind of the things that I see within the government, as well as what I saw over on the community side as well when I was back in industry.
Well, I think you coming from the Intel community side, and particularly an organization like NGA, it gives you probably a good perspective of like what are the hardest problems that we're going to have to solve in terms of getting organizations to really be open with data and use technology. Just my perspective. So we've had a couple of questions, and I'm just going to ask you directly. We're let's see, 8 days into FY21. You got any plans to reach out anytime soon?
Yeah. So
and ask for help.
Yeah, we've got some plans to reach out and ask for help. I won't talk about very specific acquisition strategies until things hit the streets. But you also have to understand, where I sit. I'm an entity of the CIO, so I'm, Department of Headquarters of the Army. So, I sit in an enterprise role, and so a lot of the problems and the challenges that I see that I want to solve are essentially enablers to some specific given mission set that's either sitting within a command or within a PEO. So typically, if there's something that I'm diving into, I'm looking for early adopters across the Army that have that problem and have that challenge where there would actually be utility in an enterprise service, right? So for instance, it's not just Create, it's Create supporting the AFC software factory, right? It's not just C Army and enterprise services, it's supporting our ERPs and supporting our major programs of record. There's gotta be someone at the other end that I'm hooking up with, because the last business that I wanna be in is that if you build it, they will come, right? There's a lot of great enterprise IT, but enterprise IT only exists for a mission outcome, period, end of story. So people that engage with me, make sure that you've got that mindset. This is for an enterprise opportunity, but somebody needs to be a customer for it. And thankfully, I've got some great interactions with people that kind of engage me individually and be like, hey, look at this great thing. I'm like, who needs it? Help me understand, help me unpack the problem sets. I can be creative. I bet you I can know somebody, but are you doing that work to cultivate that relationship and have those aha moments? That's really critical. There's also a whole bunch of stuff happening across the Army writ large. You're going to see a number of RFIs coming out of a number of the PEOs as well as the commands for people that are now starting to understand the imperative and are now starting to understand what right looks like, getting a bit more confidence to start to reach out there of, hey, I'm looking for this thing, this service, or these kinds of products. We're now at that place in that learning where the community is responding and reaching out across the Army of, hey, let's start to move on these things. So this year in FY21, definitely seeing into FY22, our plan as part of the X-Ward is driving on priorities this year where we can bring scale to the Army in 22. You're going to see a lot of the movement towards engaging the community increase over that period of time, specific to this domain of software and data modernization, leveraging the cloud.
Well, Devin will be happy to hear that. He's blowing up the chat wanting to know. And his technology actually would be helpful for a lot of the things, particularly the cloud to edge problem of secure autonomy we talked about Tuesday. So it sounds like, sort of the action agent for helping you solve problems is going to be mostly Aberdeen, I'm guessing, or other program offices who are going to touch, your platform capabilities directly. I get your point about if you build it, they will come. I will say one of the things that's been really interesting about the way Platform One and just the difference in how the Air Force is operating in the innovation space versus how the Army is operating in the innovation space. They're going really, really fast. They're going ahead of the funding. They've figured out a way to leverage, whatever it is, $700 million, I think, of funding that they already had access to through SBIR. And the folks down at P1, without really much of a budget at all, as I understand it, basically just did a bunch of MOUs with a bunch of SBIR companies and had these companies build out and test a lot of their functionality for them without much of a program budget. So I think that there are lessons to be learned there as well about, ways that you can attack it on multiple fronts. Good lessons to learn. I definitely love, though, the Army's, and we've seen this here with AAL, very, very tied to program and problem. They don't want to build anything that's not gonna transition. So we've got a few minutes left, and I'd like to turn to people, talent. There was a question, I think Cody's question in the chat about, what's your strategy for attracting and retaining top talent? I would consider you to be a non-traditional hire for the Army. You're a relatively young guy in a very senior position. I love the fact that you were able to find, or you or somebody who works for you was able to find Spencer. Spencer's a lieutenant. He's a lieutenant, and he's coming in, and he's not a signal officer. He hasn't been, if you told 99 people in the Army, senior leaders in the Army, in that senior field grade level, like what job should Spencer be doing, they would all say battery XO. Like not all, or I'm sorry, 99 of 100 of them would say battery XO. Apparently one of them said, well, you're an entrepreneurial guy and you've been in a product startup. You should probably be helping us build the cloud. So what's your approach to people?
So I love this topic. I love the fact even more so that I am not alone in this voice, and that just jazzes the daylights out of me. Across the Army, G1, Talent Management Task Force, CHARA, HRC, everybody understands the imperative and they're working to solve it. It is the coolest thing to watch. For instance, this random conversation that ended up introducing me to Spencer actually during the height of COVID, where he was a product manager for helping to solve some challenges in his free time. And I was like, hey man, like I like your grit. I like your passion. You understand like what's your purpose here? And he was like, I want to change the way the Army does business. And if you get into his story, which I'm certain you know his story, and like joining the Army to bring the value of what he saw out in Silicon Valley into the DoD to solve problems, that is his passion and his drive. And yet we were structured in a way where it's like, well, that's not conducive for him, one, to even go to the department of the headquarters. Like headquarters department of the Army sitting in the Pentagon as a first lieutenant is unheard of. And when I pitched the idea to Lieutenant General Crawford at the time, he was all in. He understood the imperative. He understood the opportunities. Like, this is a little atypical, but this is the right move. He's the right person for the job. And Spencer's been an awesome addition on the team, just simply with the way he thinks and he approaches stuff. But it's not just about Spencer. This is seen all across the Army. We have officers, enlisted personnel, that all grew up in the era understanding the value of software and data, but they signed up for another component of the Army because it jazzed them and they're passionate about it. And what's great is people like Spencer, understanding the mission that we have, the war fighting aspect that we have, is also understanding the importance of software and data to conduct that mission. And so what greater product managers do we have, or people to engage with from a customer feedback standpoint that understands how software is built and can help drive a roadmap to improve the lives of them as well as their peers, out in the middle fighting a war. So the shift that we've seen is amazing. It's entirely what's structuring our AFC software factory, is upskilling and reskilling our soldiers, not just signal officers, not just cyber, but our soldiers that have a passion for this mission and the value of software and data. And we're aligning them to get smart within the software factory, deliver products and solve problems. And we're seeing a movement for how we're just managing talent writ large and getting into a way where, it actually benefits the career of a soldier to spend time invested in digital modernization, and not just forcing everyone to, go VTIP to become a signal officer for the rest of their lives. This is something that is all the way up to the secretary, as well as the undersecretary, as well as the deputy undersecretary. We are all in. The chief and the vice chief are all in, because our people is the sustainable side of this, right? Like, if we want this to endure, it has to be an investment in our people. They have to have raised digital acumen. This is the fight of the future in the digital and cyber domain. Like, cognitive warfare is very much real and happening right now and today. And we have to treat software and data as a strategic asset. And thank God our senior leaders get that mission, and we're seeing awesome movements because of it. Establishment of my office, establishment of the software factory, as well as a number of initiatives across the Army, just simply prove that point over and over again. It is awesome to see. There are so many more people just like Spencer. Some people, when I first engaged with them and I came on board, were like, hey, you've got to bring some of your friends from industry and, help us out. And I was like, sincerely, all the right people are here. Yeah, we need to lean into industry and bring them in and collaborate and communicate. But you have passionate, wonderful, smart people that have a heart for this problem set in the Army today. We're just not finding them the way we need to. And now we're finding them and we're enabling them. And it gets to the last point I really want to make is, you can find great talent, great. You have to put tools, resources, enablement, autonomy, power in their hands to go do. There are too many people that are completely skilled set across the Army. For instance, certified ethical hacker maintains accounts within EMAS. How are you tapping into their passion, their skill sets doing that? So we've got to make sure that we're actually giving them an environment, ecosystem where they feel enabled. And that also gets to our leadership understanding how to manage digital talent to retain that talent. Not everyone's just incentivized off of money. There's a mission that we have. It's a mission unlike anywhere else in the world. We enable them to do that mission, leveraging their talent and their passion. We've got a recipe for retaining awesome people and growing the career and the general officer leadership of the future.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that that the story of how Spencer found ECMO and how Jay Long ended up over at the JSOC Global Analytics platform and some others need to be told. And so I actually have told Spencer that I'm going to work on that next month. So I may have to send it to you for review. But I think that we need to be able to tell the story of passionate people who have non-traditional skills, what the Army would consider non-traditional skills, can find a way to deliver their capability and their passion at the enterprise level. I think it's a good story, and it's going to help you find more of the right people within the ranks. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a conversation I very much looked forward to, and I'm super stoked that you were here today.
Yeah.
For the rest of our audience, it is once again time to transition to networking and Hopin. So to network with other attendees, press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen. You will be randomly paired with another attendee, and you'll have 5 minutes to chat with one another. If you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, click the connect button at the bottom of the screen. And if the person you're talking to also clicks the button, you will both receive an email from Hopin that will help you connect with one another. So with that, move on over to networking, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes.